So this article is out of the Wired, and it basically is talking about the sea level, and it said that it will be catastrophic. So a chilling new report predicts a foot of sea level rise in the US by 2050. But quirks of physics mean everyone will suffer in different ways. So it isn't going to be all at once, and it's going to be in different ways. And so there's another article also regarding sea level rise that says code red on sea level rise. And so and that is nj.com, so newjersey.com, and Sheneman. So that one has been updated since February the 25th. So both of these are in regard to sea level rise, and this one was February out of the Wired, February the 24th. And so I've been really looking at this. This is crazy. This is wild. And so some places have already started trying to build walls, water walls, basically, to aid in this. But I don't know if this is going to be any good. I don't know if you see this picture here where it looks like they're doing a construction, and you see the cars. And so I suppose this wall is supposed to block off the water. I mean, I don't think I would feel safe driving along there. I mean, if the sea level was rising, I don't know, maybe, I don't know how high it could get, but it looks like they're building that wall rather high. And so it almost looks as though, if I'm not, looking at it the right way, I don't know. I don't think it would be a little bit of water that they're building a wall that high. It would be a lot of water. And I don't think I would want to drive along there where as soon as I look out my car window, I can see nothing but the seawater. That doesn't look safe to me. So I'm just, that's in my opinion. It just does not look safe. And so last week, a group of federal agencies released a report detailing the dire consequence of sea level rise in the U.S. So this is not very far away. We're in the year of 2022. So it isn't that far away. But I'm sure that within time now, from that time, we should probably see the effects of this. And just looking at that probably is enough to have people on edge of what's to come. So it says that on average it projects up to about 12 additional inches in the next 30 years. And so the same amount that the country has seen in the past century. So between now and the year of 2100, or 2100, the coastlines may average an extra 2 feet of rise. And this is in part to thanks to emissions already in the atmosphere, and up to about 5 feet more in humanitarian fails to cut its emissions between now and then. So this is pretty serious. So look at all the, let's go back up here. It looks like they're building a high wall, and the way it looks like this construction here is to basically block the sea level water off from that freeway. That doesn't sound good. Just that doesn't look good. I don't think that's a good idea. That's in my opinion. So emphasis on average. The reality is that different stretches of the coast will see wildly different rates of oceanic creep. So by 2050, that year, the average rise will be 4 to 8 inches along the Pacific and 10 to 14 inches along the Atlantic coastlines and 14 to 18 inches along the Gulf. So what gives? If melting glaciers are loading all the oceans with extra water, shouldn't all the coast experience sea level rise equally? So I guess it's saying that not all of the areas are going to experience the same thing. So the issue comes down to quirks of physics. So how fast the land itself is sinking. Now listen to that. Yeah, I said it. How fast the land is sinking. So supposedly we're sinking in some areas. Some areas are sinking, and I said some areas because I was reading when some areas are sinking, other areas are being pushed together and they're going up. And I believe this will explain. So the issue comes down to physics, how fast the land itself is sinking and the characteristics of the coastal water. So comparing just two cities on different coasts neatly illustrates what a striking difference, okay, these factors can make. So Galveston, Texas, where the land is slumping, could see 2 feet of rise by the year of 2050. Meanwhile, Anchorage, Alaska, could see 8 inches, which is a lot more, of sea level drop. It seems like the opposite. More drop and more rise of sea level in an area that didn't have sea level. So that's what I meant by some areas are sinking while others are being pushed together or they're seeing less water. And what that's going to make people do is probably migrate to those areas that have less water. So thanks to the fact that its land is actually rising following the departure of the long gone glaciers. So I don't know how that's going to look having people live in areas that used to have glaciers. I don't know. Somebody's going to try it, I'm sure. So subsidence. So take a look at this interactive map. So there's an interactive map along with this. I don't know that it's on here. I think it's where you can look at it. If you look at this article, you want to see this article, there's a map showing the effects of the sinking, the lands that are sinking and the lands that are slumping, the lands that are rising because they're losing the water or losing the glaciers because of that sea level rise. So, so it says it came out with a report which was produced by the agencies of NASA, including NASA and the National Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration, so the U.S. Geological Survey. They basically created this map so you could see the effects of what this looks like over a period of years. So on the left, you can play the time scales, which switch to the different scenarios, and researchers used it, which projects different rates of global sea level rise in the future. Then you click anywhere on the coastline and you can pull up a projection of the rise for that spot. So click again, then it gives you the full projection. So the scroll to the bottom, individual process contributions for sea level scenarios. So I guess that's just telling you how to do it. And you see this little map here. And I guess once you click on it, and that's when you can start looking at the projections or whatever. So now things get interesting. So the colors and the bars represent different contributors or contributors to the local sea level rise. Which one we know is emissions, fuel emissions. That's the reason why they want to get rid of the gas cars, which that's going to be hard because think about it. Like almost all the cars are gas cars and they go further. And like those battery operated cars, you can't drive them too far out. And I guess they're working on that. And they probably have got cars that they've made that go longer distances. But so, for example, melting from glaciers and ice sheets shown in the purple, the pink obviously the track on inches, it tracks on inches of rise. And so this gets really mappy like. So for those of you that are like bored with that kind of stuff, it says Galveston's chart is showing the color brown that dominates, and it indicates much more complicated factors, vertical land motion, and the chart also shows the land that's sinking. So there's lands that are supposedly going to be sinking, so along with the Gulf Coast. So this is largely due to an extraction of oil and water. So these are reasons why the land is sinking in that area. So the Gulf Coast, this is largely due to those extractions. So that's the reason why it's slumping. And so which makes the ground crumble like an empty plastic bottle. Isn't that scary? And people are living on that. Look about, if you think about people's homes, how that's going to affect that. That's why I don't think it's a good idea to buy any houses right now. I just really don't. From what I've been looking at, everybody's in trouble. I don't care who it is. So here in the U.S., so the phenomenon is also known as subsidence, and it can happen when the groundwater is over extracted. So as is also the case of Indonesia. So it's not just the U.S. I hate to say this. But it's also Indonesia, Mexico City, and California San Joaquin, I don't know, Valley. I don't know if I said that correctly. But the sediments are naturally settled over time when they settle over time. But it sounds like everything is getting like really weak because of them pulling out resources like the water and the oil, and it's just making things really weak. You're living on a weak foundation. That might explain why when you see some places here in like Hollywood, they had a lot of places where the street just sunk all the way down, cars went all the way down in there. And I just think the ground underneath is not as stable as people thought it was. And there could be a number of factors. I'm not just saying this right here, but I just think that it's not as stable as people thought it was. I always used to think, oh, it's nice and thick, and there's a lot of sediments, a lot of things underneath. But no, it's keeping it stable. No, it's just very weak. It's not as secure as people thought it was. And so some of the highest projections of the worlds of the sea level rise are on the Gulf Coast. And so that's not good. It says this is by a Ben Hamilton, so a research scientist at NASA. So that Propulsion Laboratory, it's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He's from the NASA's organization and one of the 24 authors of the new report. And so heavily affected by the subsidence. So that's the primary driver there. So I guess in Galveston in particular, the land has been collapsing at an astonishing rate. Now this is Texas, or might I add you, Galveston, that's where it's located. This is where they're making all these laws to go against people's rights. I had to include that in there. Well, you need to look at your land because it's collapsing. So the numbers I'm going to give are going to be hard to believe. So listen to this. But there is an area in Baytown where there's a big Exxon Mobil industrial plant. And that sank about 11 feet in a period of 50 to 60 years already, because they were just unsustainably pulling water out of there. And this was said by a Bob Stokes, who's the president of Galveston Bay Foundation and a conservation nonprofit. that wasn't involved in the new report. There was a nice upper middle class area subdivision where all the Exxon executives lived there that ultimately had to be condemned because of this. Water was lapping up the foundations of the houses. So that's why I said it's not a good idea to buy houses right now. Probably not ever, because it just seems like this is a recipe for disaster. And I'm not laughing like this is funny. It isn't funny. I am really just, I'm just really surprised that people are not paying attention. Well, some people are. That the same people that are making these laws with a quickness are not looking at this right here. You can make all the laws you want. They're not going to mean diddly squat when your house is underwater. So, whether or not the irony was lost on them isn't clear. And so, I guess this is another map. It's an illustration through NASA. So, in the map above, red means the land is adding elevation, okay? And I will go back up. So it's adding it. I believe all of the colder regions, because they're losing that glacial effect, or the glaciers are melting. Those are the places where there'll be a less of a slumping, because of course nobody's populated on those areas, and they're not pulling resources from there, so to speak, until they go over there and start doing it over there, and there's nowhere to live. That's just my opinion, but so it goes on to say that the map above shows this, and so while the Gulf Coast is very blue, by contrast, Alaska is very red, okay? So it's the opposite effect. And so because it's going through a period of uplift in the Alaskan regions, the Gulf Coast is going through a period of slumping or crumbling because of the pulling of the water and the oil and all of those things like that. So basically bouncing back from the area that was covered with glaciers thousands of years ago. And so this is known as a glacial isotactic adjustment. So this is probably going to also change the whole thing of Pangea. Because, over time, continents shift, they move together, or they realign themselves in other ways. So with the sea level rise and all of these things that have been altered in the atmosphere due to emissions and whatever, human activity, the map's going to look a lot different in 2050 and then thereafter. So think about how you sink into a memory foam mattress. Memory foam, how you push your hand down into it and then you let go, and then it just kind of goes back. And so when you get up, the material takes a minute to fill the void of your body that you created. And so the same thing happens when the land that was weighted down with glaciers disappears. So if the glaciers disappear on that land, then that area starts to prop up. And so now the Earth is no longer in an ice age. So parts of Alaska are actually rising. So it's the opposite effect. So offsetting some of the local effects of the sea level rise. Which means I can just see people trying to figure out how to, migrate over there if they see that the other areas are not livable. And we know who's going to try to do that. I'm assuming it'll be people that maybe have money or they have the means to do that and relocate. But if you're doing the same activity as you did in the other areas, it's not going to make much of a difference. You'll create that whole problem again. And it'll be worse, I'm sure. So in this chart for Anchorage, you can see vertical land motion is headed in the opposite direction. And that's why the brown bars are at the bottom of the chart and rather than at the top. Okay. And so as they are or were for Galveston. So rising land reduces the risk of sea level rise. Okay. In some areas, of course, I'm sure. But what's important are rising land reduces the risk of rising seas. What's important at the coastline is relative sea level. Okay, so it's how the land is moving relative to the ocean, and this is said by Hamilton. So if the land is sinking or rising, it's going to make your exposure to the sea level rise that much different. So it's going to be different in different areas, in other words. So within the coastal cities, elevation can be very dramatic. Okay, can vary dramatically on even block to block, building to building, particularly when subsidence is at play. So the new satellites are coming online that can map elevation changes along coastlines in extreme detail. So scientists have been using space lasers, for instance, to predict the worldwide by 2100, 2100. Some 400 million people will be living in these areas at risk of the sea level rise. So some people will be out, well, I won't say some, millions of people will be impacted. So problem two is water characteristics. So in the charts, you'll also notice blue charts and blue bars, which represents the stereodynamic of sea level and or changes in the physical processes of the ocean, for instance, to currents and temperature. So temperature is a critical factor for determining the sea level rise because warmer water takes up more space. So a warmer body of water like the Gulf is literally bigger than a cooler one like the Pacific off the Alaskan coast. And so indeed, about half of the global sea level rise comes from the water simply being hotter. So a swelling ocean primes the coast for catastrophic flooding. And the new report warns that by the year of 2050, moderate floods, meaning they're destructive instead of mere nuisances, will be 10 times as common in the U.S. as they are today. So major flooding will happen 5 times as often. And because the climate change has raised the baseline or has raised the baseline sea levels. The baseline is going up over time because of global warming, and then you'll still have all these things that are traveling on the top of it. And this is said by a Hamilton. You have tides and you have storms and hurricanes as well. And so here's a picture right here showing, and so these are known as compound events. So hurricanes are extremely destructive in part because they are shoving a wall of water on shore, and the sea levels are already high enough, so they're making the wall taller still. So the climate change is also supercharging those hurricane events since the storm feeds on the warmer waters. So the warm water atmosphere holds more water. Another quirk of physics is that it helped last year's Hurricane Ida to devastate New York with floods. So the water from the storm, the hurricanes, and otherwise piles on higher baselines of the sea level rise, overwhelming stormwater system. So you would have heavy precipitation on top already, high sea levels, which is going to keep water from being able to exit urban areas. Think about it. And what are those areas? You can just picture in your mind. It says University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill hydrologist Antonia Sebastian, who studies the Gulf Coast but wasn't involved in the new report. We're seeing that when it rains, the rain has nowhere to go. So it ponds up in the roads. And so that's why you see the rain ponding up, and it looks like a lot of streets are inundated with water. But the flooding will be way worse on the Gulf Coast than Alaska. And on accounts of subsidence, high tides, the storms creating compound events. The map above, you'll see the projection number of the minor and moderate and major high tide flooding, which is HTF in the year of 2050. And so I guess that's the map you see right here and how it looks, events per year and how it changes on the map. And you'll see how the water is just affecting, it's really little. So you can't see it, and you'd have to look at this article to see the effects of it, and if you kind of know. So notice how the Gulf Coast and the East Coast compared to the West Coast, particularly the Alaskan coastline. So how do we fix it? Knowing which areas are most likely to flood can help legislators and engineers prepare for the future. But the new report also highlights what local advocates already know. So the least fortunate Americans are the most at risk. Gulf Coast cities singled out in the new report, like Galveston, heavily populated, have many low-income communities in the flood zone. So historically, there's been inequity in where we built across the U.S., and so includes disadvantaged low-income and minority communities being pushed more into the floodplain areas and places that are highly vulnerable to flooding. And we saw that, remember what happened in the Hurricane Katrina, those areas. And so the higher ground areas were where there were less flooding, or people who are probably a little more well off, and then the lower land areas, or people that are in that punch bowl area, is where they had the levees. And so it says places that are highly vulnerable to flooding. So that's said by Natalie Snyder, Associate Vice President of the Climate Resilience Coast and Watersheds Program in the Environmental Defense Fund, which wasn't involved in this new report. So we think that the coastlines are wealthy, but there's a lot of areas that are exposed to sea level rise that are low-income communities as well. And so local governments, including those in nearby suburbs and smaller towns, don't necessarily have a tax base or expertise to develop their own projects to adapt to sea level rise, for instance, and to determine which structures need to be moved. So it really behooves the federal government, for us as a whole, to support those communities, give them the capacity, to give them technical expertise to help define their own future. This is said by Snyder. So that when money comes available, such as with the infrastructure package, there's a lot of money coming down from the federal government. Those communities are ready to implement the projects. Okay. And so that is that article right there. And then there is a Code Red article that talks about sea level issues, which that didn't sound so good. I don't think this one is as long as the first one that I was looking at. And it basically says the window on the sea level rise to do something about it is closing. So this is according to a report in the NOAA, which is also the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. For a short, sea level has risen approximately 1 foot over the past century. And so I guess there's a little a cartoon. The window to the address of climate change is getting smaller and wetter. And so you see the window, and you see where it looks like there's nothing but water outside the window, and the person is looking at it. And so it says learn to swim. So it's basically pretty much saying the same thing, but it's saying that to do something about it, there's less and less time that we have to do something about these issues. And so the results of the rise can be seen every time a nor'easter rolls up the coast, floods shore towns, north to South Jersey. The ocean trying to swallow the shore is a bad news, and there isn't any good news. So this is NOAA. Also, they predict the base on the current emissions. Once again, we're hearing that we could experience an additional foot of sea level rise in just the next 3 decades. Okay, and so which, as you can probably imagine, is suboptimal. And so lower Manhattan would look like Venice, and the Meadowlands would go from being a swamp to an oceanfront property, and the jets would still sink. And so by now you must be asking yourself some questions like, is there anything that we can do about it? It says yes, we will. Yes, and will we? And probably not. We probably won't, at least not enough. And so the problems now is one time of political will. And so we have officially entered into the mitigation phase of dealing with climate change. So it's here and it's not leaving anytime soon. And while we can't stop the climate change, we will have a small window of time to mitigate this issue, its most dystopian effects. And so that involves a major reduction in global emissions by a coalition of world governments. As a quick scan of today's newsfeed will tell you, that's easier said than done. So if I had to make a prediction, I guess that we're most likely to continue on our current path of nibbling at the edges of climate change while keeping our fingers crossed that somebody figures out uh, cold fusion. Okay, so that's a very short article. I don't think that went any further than this. So that just tells you right there that this is not a good picture that we're seeing. I mean, I know this is a funny little depiction of it, but there is actually nothing funny about this at all, guys. I mean, I just think that they really have worked very hard now we've got people fighting. We've got a war going on with Russia uh, against Ukraine, and then we have this issue that's constantly looking at us, all of us, and nobody's paying attention.